Imagine a world where the person who declares the war is also the one who has to carry the soldier, not raise them, not grieve them, carry them for 9 months inside their own body. That one biological fact, that single shift in who bears the physical cost of human life, would unravel almost every war, every empire, every border dispute in recorded history. And it would do it quietly, from the inside out. This is not a fantasy. This is a thought experiment backed by evolutionary biology, behavioral economics, and some of the most provocative research in political science. Because when you ask the question, what if men could get pregnant, you are really asking a much deeper question. Who controls the cost of human life? And whoever pays that cost, how do they vote? Let us start at the very beginning, not of civilization, of pain. Pregnancy is not a condition. It is a biological event that commandeers an entire human body for 40 weeks. Your organs shift position. Your immune system partially suppresses itself so it does not reject a foreign organism. Your heart grows, literally grows, pumping 30 to 50% more blood than it normally does. Your bones soften. Your brain physically changes structure. A 2016 study by Hoekzema and colleagues published in Nature Neuroscience found that pregnancy actually reduces gray matter volume in regions associated with social cognition. A rewiring, the researchers believe, helps parents attune to their infants. Not a side effect, a feature. Now imagine the person who campaigns for office also has to survive this process. Imagine the general who orders a ground invasion knows personally and physically what it costs to produce one human life. Imagine the senator who votes to cut maternal health care has had a hemorrhage at 32 weeks, has felt the terror of their own body revolting against survival. Would the math of war change? Research suggests it would, and here is why. The field of behavioral economics tells us that people systematically undervalue what they do not pay for. Psychologist Daniel Kahneman, who won the Nobel Prize for his work on human judgment and decision-making, showed that people feel the pain of a loss roughly twice as intensely as the pleasure of an equivalent gain. This is loss aversion, and when it comes to war, loss aversion is staggeringly unequal. Those who bear the biological cost of producing life experience its loss differently than those who do not. A 2008 study by Dafoe and Caughey in the American Political Science Review found that female political leaders are statistically less likely to initiate military conflicts than their male counterparts. Not because women are naturally peaceful, the research is more complex than that, but because the political coalitions women have historically built, the voter bases they have drawn from, have been more attuned to the personal cost of violence. They represent people who have paid a physical price for life. Now flip the biology. If men carried pregnancies, their bodies would be the price tag of every human life brought into the world. Every soldier lost in a battlefield would represent, to the men in Parliament, not an abstraction, but a biological cost they themselves had paid. 9 months of nausea, of physical vulnerability, of their body being used as a vessel and then returned to them changed. That cost would be priced into every political decision, every war authorization, every budget allocation. Political scientist Barbara Ehrenreich argued in her 1997 book, Blood Rights, that war culture is deeply entangled with who historically held power over the body. When men controlled the bodies that produced soldiers, war became an abstraction they could calculate with, not a visceral horror, a strategy. What if that calculation were impossible because the cost was built into their own skin? Let us talk about economics, because the financial architecture of civilization would also look unrecognizable. Pregnancy, even in the healthiest circumstances, forces career interruption. It demands access to healthcare, to nutrition, to rest, to safety. In a world where men experience this, the infrastructure around reproductive health would not be a niche political issue. It would be the center of every economy. Maternity leave, or in this case paternity leave, would not be a progressive luxury debated in committees. It would be non-negotiable because the people writing the laws would have spent 9 months needing it. Economist Claudia Goldin, who won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2023 for her decades of research on gender and the labor market, demonstrated that the single largest driver of the wage gap between men and women is not discrimination at the point of hiring. It is the career cost of caregiving. Women earn less over a lifetime primarily because of the interruptions, the flexibility penalties, the physical demands of reproduction and early childcare. In a world where men shared that cost biologically, those penalties would reshape every labor market on Earth. Parental leave would be universal. Flexible work structures would be the default. Childcare would be publicly funded the way roads are funded, because the people who vote to fund roads would now be the same people who need childcare. The economy would be built around the rhythms of human reproduction rather than in spite of them. And here is where it gets interesting, not just politically, culturally. Think about what pregnancy does to your relationship with your own body. You stop being the protagonist of your experience and become, for a period, a container. Your decisions, what you eat, how you sleep, whether you travel, whether you drink, whether you take a certain medication, are no longer solely your own. There is a future person whose existence depends on your present choices. Philosophers call this an expansion of the self. Psychologist Alison Gopnik, one of the world's foremost researchers on infant cognition, has argued that the relationship between a parent and a child is one of the most profound reshapings of identity that a human can experience. It is not just love. It is a structural change in how you model other people's minds, how you think about the future, how much weight you give to the long term. Now imagine that expansion of self happening to every person who holds political power. Every prime minister, every corporate executive, every military commander, every head of state. All of them having at some point in their life spent 9 months acutely aware that their choices affected someone other than themselves. All of them having felt the physical intimacy of responsibility. All of them having given up sovereignty over their own bodies temporarily for the sake of a future person they had not yet met. The long-termism of political decision-making would change, not because men would become softer, but because their body would have given them a felt sense of the future, a 9-month lesson in delayed consequences. Consider climate policy. Consider pension systems. Consider infrastructure investment. The research literature on what drives long-term political thinking is surprisingly consistent. It points toward people who have children, who care for dependents, who have bodies that have been through time and change. Now imagine those bodies having carried that dependence physically. We would be a different civilization. And then there is breastfeeding. If we push the thought experiment further, if men not only gestated but also nursed, the shift becomes total. Breastfeeding is not merely feeding, it is hormonal. Oxytocin, the bonding chemical released during nursing, has been studied extensively for its effects on prosocial behavior. Researcher Kerstin Uvnas Moberg, who has spent decades studying oxytocin at the Karolinska Institute, has found that it reduces stress reactivity, increases trust, increases generosity, and promotes attachment across social groups. Oxytocin is sometimes called the trust hormone, and in a world where men experienced its repeated biochemical surge during the early months of their child's life, social bonding patterns at every level of society might look radically different, not softness. Chemistry. Here is the thing, though. The most honest version of this thought experiment does not end in utopia, because power does not disappear when biology changes. It adapts. there would almost certainly be stratification inside the experience of male pregnancy. Wealthy men hiring surrogates or finding ways to outsource gestation, just as wealthy women have historically found ways to navigate reproductive coercion. The powerful would find loopholes, they always do, but the aggregate shift would be real, because you cannot opt your whole class out. You cannot exempt all men from the experience the way you can exempt an individual. Biology is not a policy, it is a reality, and the more people who live inside a reality, the more that reality shapes what gets built. We built civilization around who holds the burden. Whoever carries the cost of human life shapes the value placed on human life. That is not sentiment, that is structural, it is economics, it is evolutionary psychology, it is behavioral science. And in a world where men had always been the ones who carried the soldier, literally inside their own bodies, we would be asking whether it was really worth it, just the way women have been asking that question since the beginning. Imagine a world where the person who declares the war is also the one who has to carry the soldier. Now you understand why that world never existed and what it cost us. Every week we open a new file, a new truth about why humans feel, think, and act the way they do. If you want in, subscribe. The next one might change how you see everything.